Hello, everyone. Welcome to the August Alumni Lunch and Learn for the L. Douglas Wilder School of Government and Public Affairs at Virginia Commonwealth University. Today, our featured speakers or panelists are Dr. James Lane and Dr. Maria Pitre-Martin, as well as our guest moderator, Dr. Andrew Daire, for our presentation and discussion about reopening Virginia's K-12 schools and measuring the COVID-19 journey, recovery, redesign, and restart. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is James Wazalewski, and I'm the Director of Development for the Wilder School at VCU. As a quick reminder, we are recording this session as well as a question and answer session. Please note that this also includes any comments that are made in the chat. We encourage you to do so, as well as asking questions through Q&A feature of the webinar, as well as the comments, as we will have staff monitoring both. We are pleased to have each of you here for our session. And at this time, I would like to introduce Dr. Susan Gooden, Dean and Professor at the L. Douglas Wilder School of Government and Public Affairs. Dr. Gooden.
Thank you so much, James, and welcome everyone. As James mentioned, I'm Dean of the Wilder School of Government and Public Affairs, and I'm pleased to have you here today for our Lunch and Learn series. This is a series that we kicked off a few months ago, and it's been very successful. We try to focus on contemporary issues that might be of interest to many of our more than 10,000 alumni across the world. For those who were with us for our kickoff session in June, you'll know that we had Secretary Brian Moran, who is Secretary of Emergency Management for the Commonwealth of Virginia and Public Safety, and he talked about the coronavirus pandemic and responses to it. That was followed by our second speaker, who was Michael Paul Williams, columnist at the Richmond Times-Dispatch, who talked about structural racism and the Confederate monuments in Richmond. And so today, for August, no more of a timely topic than looking at K-12 education. So I'm very excited about today's panel. I would also be remiss if I didn't say a little bit about the Wilder School. We're very pleased to share with you that the Wilder School remains a top 20% ranked program with all public affairs programs nationally. And for the first time, we ranked in the area of public management and leadership. So we're very proud of the work that we've done. You may have also recently seen our Commonwealth poll, which surveys attitudes of Virginians periodically. That was picked up by many national and local media sources. And that was particularly interesting because it looked at the popularity of leadership both at the federal level and at the state level. So if you haven't had an opportunity to check that out, we encourage you to do so. And perhaps most importantly, we're very proud that as we kick off this academic year, although we've had a lot of challenges, our master's enrollment has increased by 67% for the fall semester. So we're very excited. We think this is a wonderful opportunity, and certainly the importance of having a career in public affairs and public policy, the importance of that has been underscored at the federal, state, and local levels. So just a few nuggets about some of the things that are going on in the Wilder School. And I'd also urge you to mark your calendars for September 17th. We'll talk more about that at the end of today's presentation, where we will have a special event honoring the 30th inauguration of our namesake, the Honorable L. Douglas Wilder. But for today, I'm delighted to be partnering with the School of Education for today's session. And it is my great pleasure to introduce to you my colleague, Dean Andrew Daire. Dean Daire has been at the School of Education and at VCU since June of 2016. He has over 25 years of experience in education and higher education, having served at both the University of Houston and the University of Central Florida. He is a sought-after expert on many areas involving K-12 education, K-12 leadership, higher education leadership, as well as equity and inclusion. So thank you so much, Dr. Daire, for partnering with us today, and we look forward to this session.
Great, thank you so much, Dean Gooden, and thank you for your wonderful team behind the scenes that's really has just done an outstanding job in helping to make this happen. I'm really honored to have the opportunity to moderate this session with two individuals that I would call colleagues. I'm really excited and proud to be Dean of the VCU School of Education. There's a number of things that we're quite proud of, particularly our ranking. Our US News and World Report, we're ranked 16th for the best public graduate school of education in the country, and we're ranked 8th for best online programs. We have a significant amount of rigorous research that's happening in the school. Last year, we brought in about 28 million in external funding, which is actually second in the university behind the School of Medicine. But even though I'm quite proud of all of these accolades, I do believe that's what's most important in the work that we do in the VCU School of Education, is that we are responsive to the needs of the Commonwealth of Virginia, and we're responsive to the needs of our surrounding school divisions. I often say that we must function as first responders in running to where the needs are the greatest. So I take quite literally our role at VCU as a Research One university, as a community engaged university. And I'm really excited to have had the opportunity to partner and collaborate both with the Virginia Department of Education and also with Petersburg City Schools. Actually, yesterday, I facilitated a webinar on becoming an anti-racist education leader for VDOE. I served on the Return to School Planning Committee. I serve on the Virginia Commission for African American History and Education. I'm vice chair for the advisory board for teacher education and licensure, and also served on the impact work group of VDOE's school readiness committee. So, I do try to do my best to be very engaged and to be responsive and to assist VDOE. And it's the same thing for Petersburg City Schools. Just really so excited to have Dr. Pitre-Martin as the superintendent there. I did have the opportunity to meet with her a few months after she started, and we immediately connected our teams together to make sure that we are doing the best we can to support that outstanding school division. We also have our RTR program, our residency program, that is really thriving in that school division. We're in the high school, and the professional development has been so beneficial that the middle school teachers are also participating in that. And I'm excited that we've completed the selection process for our next cohort of secondary ed, special education, and elementary education teachers, our residents that's going to be working in Petersburg. So just so excited to have Drs. Lane and Pitre-Martin. Just a little bit about our panelists today. Dr. James Lane became Virginia's 25th Superintendent of Public Instruction in June of 2018. Among his duties is leading the Virginia is for Learners initiative, which is a commitment to ensure that every public school student is ready to thrive after graduation. Dr. Lane has served as a division superintendent in Chesterfield, Goochland, and Middlesex counties, and was the 2017 Virginia Superintendent of the Year for his leadership in Goochland County. He was one of 100 superintendents to attend the 2014 Connect Ed Superintendent Summit that was held at the White House. And I'll just add that Dr. Lane was actually one of the first superintendents that I met with when I joined VCU in 2016. My kids are proud graduates of Cosby High School in Chesterfield, and it's been exciting to be working and collaborating with Dr. Lane since I arrived here at VCU. Dr. Maria Pitre-Martin has been the superintendent of Petersburg City Schools since July of 2019. With public education experience spanning 3 decades, she has served in leadership positions at the school, district, and state level, including Deputy State Superintendent for North Carolina Department of Public Instruction, Chief Academic Officer for the School District of Philadelphia, and Assistant Superintendent for the East Baton Rouge Parish School System in Louisiana. We are very, very excited and proud to have Dr. Pitre-Martin and her outstanding leadership working in Petersburg. So I will turn it over to Dr. Lane for a presentation, and then after Dr. Lane, we'll have the opportunity to hear from Dr. Pitre-Martin, and then we will turn it over to questions and answers. So Dr. Lane.
Thanks so much, Dr. Daire, to you and Dean Gooden for having us on this event today. I'm excited to be here, especially with Dr. Pitre-Martin, who is just a phenomenal superintendent, and the work that she's doing in Petersburg is incredible. And I hope you all get to know her because I have been extremely impressed with her leadership. Well, I wanted to start a little bit by talking about the broad vision of what we do at the VDOE and how that vision has changed in the context of this global pandemic. But in the Commonwealth, we had a vision very similar to any organization with a ton of buzzwords that nobody remembers. And we've really simplified that over the last few months. And we are all about maximizing student potential here at the Virginia Department of Education. And that's an important shift in thinking, I think, for everyone to understand that, you know, the VDOE is responsible for standards and tests and SOLs and all those things I'm sure you're familiar with. But what we're saying here with this changing vision is it's no longer about whether students are meeting an arbitrary benchmark at any point in time. It's about, are we taking them from where they are to the maximum of what they could be? And there's an equity message in that. I'll talk a little bit later. Now, to realize this maximizing potential, we launched our Virginia's for Learners initiative, and there are 3 major pillars to that. The first is about training our K-12 students to go deeper. And so you'll see, especially over the last 3 to 5 years, a major shift in our approach to standards. We now are focused less on rote memorization and basic content and are focused more on critical thinking, creative thinking, communication, collaboration, and citizenship. 5 skills that we think are absolutely necessary for students to be successful and to have their potential maximized. And so that shift is really important in the context of the pandemic that we're dealing with, because it also affects the way that we're approaching the needs that our students have in an ever-changing landscape of whether they're in person or virtual, that I'll talk about later. We also are about preparing our graduates for what comes next. So we did develop the profile of a Virginia graduate, and you will see that we are working really closely with business and parents and schools and school divisions to make sure that when students graduate, they know exactly what they're going to do when they leave, whether it's go to a fabulous university like Virginia Commonwealth, or whether that's go right into the world of work. But no matter what pathway they choose, they're prepared for it and have had experiences in high school to get them there. Then the third major pillar has been about making success the highest standard for every school. We significantly changed the accreditation standards in Virginia in 2017. So that now you get a more comprehensive picture of the way that schools look. We have an incredible increase on racial and economic equity, even in our accreditation model. I mean, you may or may not believe this. We've been measuring achievement gaps for years and talking about closing achievement gaps, which I think are based on really opportunity gaps. But we've never actually held our schools accountable for achievement gaps until 2017. The new accreditation model is not just about holding schools accountable for overall pass rates or general trends in the school, but it's about making sure that every student has a successful experience in our schools. And I think it's a more fair way of assessing school and student progress. And so you'll see that our model now focuses on continuous improvement. And I like to say our model is a flashlight and not a hammer in the way that it used to be. And so when we're maximizing the potential of all learners, we know that education is the tool to reduce poverty, address social challenges, sustain economic advancement. And so we are very focused on making sure that our education meets the changing needs of diverse populations, is culturally relevant, recognizes that gaps exist, and works every day to close those to ensure a great curriculum for every student. But we have a new focus that we're dealing with right now. So that's a little bit about where we've been over the last couple of years. But this new focus is about COVID-19. On March 13th, we closed our schools for what we thought was originally going to be 2 weeks. On March 23rd, 10 days later, we closed them for the remainder of the school year. But the important message that you should know is that schools will be open moving forward. And so any experience that you had with our public schools between March and June should not be a comparison of what you should expect in September. When we closed, we asked our school divisions just to focus on continuity of learning, just to keep students from regressing. But now, with schools opening, whether it's virtual or hybrid or in person, which I'll talk more about later, we have put out a clear mandate that new instruction must continue. And whether or not you're in person, students should be getting a rigorous and high quality educational experience. And that's a major shift in what we're asking of our school divisions. And I think that you'll see as schools are opening, we've already had schools opening. We've got schools open in person from Norton City, to Louisa County. And most of our school divisions will be starting after Labor Day. But the key thing is that from the department standpoint, if you look at the Constitution of Virginia, ultimately, we made the decision to close schools statewide. But as we open schools, the Constitution tells us that school boards ultimately have the authority on how to open schools. But we are here to support our schools. And that is what the Virginia Department of Education's work is about. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about what we've put into our return to school plan so that you know what you can expect to see as school divisions open. The Virginia Return to School Plan does align to the Governor's Forward Virginia Blueprint. So as the business community went from phase 1 to phase 2 to phase 3, the school communities have done that as well. We moved quicker through the phases than I think our educators were prepared for, but that was good news up until we got to July, where cases started to increase again. But the idea of the plan was originally that we would scale up in-person instruction, focus on our most vulnerable learners first, and address social, emotional, and physical health together. And but what happened is, because the summer data looked so good in May and June, we went quickly from phase 1 to phase 2 to phase 3. A lot of our school divisions had not started implementing in-person instruction by the time we got to phase 3. Then cases started to spike, and you've seen a lot more cautious approach by our school divisions. So what you would see, and I've got a heat map that is not available today, but I'll send out to the Wilder schools so they can share with you. But essentially what you see is that most of our suburban, our larger districts, and our urban school districts are going with a predominantly virtual approach to instruction, even though the state has recommendations that allow more in-person instruction. And then you're seeing that our smaller and our rural communities are tending to have some in-person offerings, with some exceptions. We've had some outbreaks in a few communities that have led our school divisions to be more cautious. But to support school divisions in how they make these decisions, we have provided a variety of documents. One is the phase guidance for schools that I just mentioned. And if you'll go to the next slide, the second is there's extensive CDC guidance. But if you're interested in learning more about how schools are open, the one document I would highly recommend you spend time with is our Recover, Redesign, and Restart document. That document is pictured on the right here, but is essentially a 140-page guide on how we're asking schools to open, whether in person or virtual. And we have over 120 frequently asked questions. But note that we're not just recovering from the pandemic and restarting schools. We are also focused on how we can redesign our school environments for these new virtual and hybrid situations that we find our students dealing with. And on the next slide, we have a lot to do in terms of how we can support our schools. We've sent a lot of money down through the CARES Act, with and more money is starting to flow with the governor's fund and the ESSER's, the VDOE state set aside. That Congress is working through the HEALS and HEROES Act, and the General Assembly just met for the first time yesterday in special session, and we're expecting major budget changes. But over $210 million has gone out through CARES Act applications to our school districts already. And we're working on now nearly another $100 million in grant applications to support school districts with their work. On the next slide, I'm going to talk through a little bit of how we're approaching this from a data standpoint. The Virginia Department of Health ultimately derives the recommendations around the health and safety factors that our school divisions think about. And there are a number of metrics that go into this. We're not just focused on the burden in the community, but also the trend. So do you have a lot of cases, yes or no? And are the cases increasing? So you might be in a school community that has a very low number of cases, but if over a 7-day or 14-day average, you're seeing an incredible increasing trend, we're as concerned about that as if you had a lot of cases. And so what we're really looking for is school divisions to have low trend and low burden before we start to recommend a lot of school opening. The next slide is going to detail how we're thinking about that. Even though we're in phase 3, we now have provided very specific guidance based on the data and based on the transmission level to help school districts think about what they should be doing. So if you're in a community that has high transmission, so you have high burden, high trend, then we really don't think that you should have a lot of students attending in person. And so we've asked you essentially to go back to phase 1 type activities, which would be mostly virtual for students, but we do think that our most vulnerable population, our students with disabilities, should have access to in-person instruction, even in the most restrictive phase. If you have moderate transmission in your community, which is a lot of what we're seeing in the Richmond metro area where VCU is, then we recommend, phase 2 type activities where, again, most students are virtual, but our youngest learners, pre-K through 3, our English language learners who really struggle with virtual learning, and again, our students with disabilities could have some in-person instruction. It's when you get to low transmission that we recommend every student have an in-person instruction experience, maybe hybrid with staggered schedules to accommodate physical distancing and hygiene and cleaning requirements and mask wearing. And then it's only when we get to really no transmission that we would say all students should be attending every day and what might be a new normal. And so on the next slide, just so you know the type of data that school districts are thinking through, it's case incidence rate, it's outbreaks, it's emergency department visits, it's hospitalizations, it's percent positivity, it's cases amongst healthcare workers, it's hospital bed capacity, it's PPE capacity. You've heard some states just talking about a certain number of cases per 100,000 students, and that's how those states are deciding whether students are coming back. You'll see that the data matrix that we've put together with school districts is very robust across a lot of areas. And it's, again, not just about burden. You see there, it's about trend as well. And so again, we are asking as the predominant consideration for schools, and they think about opening, to think about physical distancing. So we are asking our schools to keep 6 foot of physical distancing between students as the gold standard, but we have allowed school districts to go as low as 3 foot of physical distancing if that's combined with a mask. I'm going to skip the next slide with a video for time's sake and just talk you through a couple waivers that we're working on. We have changed the way that we've asked our school divisions to focus on student attendance. Typically, the student comes to class, they're attending, and then they get to be a part of our financial model that gives school districts money based on whether students attend. In this new COVID world, we're saying now that attendance shouldn't be just time-based. Some students don't have internet access at home. They're having to do correspondence learning. So attendance can also, in this current environment, at least for this school year, be task-based. And so if students are doing their work and keeping up with what's going on in the class, they can be considered attending as well. We've also supported our school districts with a lot of work in the virtual space. We have a product that we provide to school divisions called Virtual Virginia. We now have the ability for every teacher and every student in the Commonwealth to use our learning management system to deliver instruction. We've provided content day for day in every core area in grades K through 12 that teachers can use to teach from. By October 1, we'll have completely asynchronous instruction available in virtual Virginia. And we also provide teachers for over 12,000 students if a teacher isn't available to actually do virtual instruction for the school districts in virtual Virginia. That we doubled our capacity this year. And so if you think about virtual Virginia supporting 12,000 students, actually from the state standpoint, virtual Virginia is the largest school districts in the Commonwealth. And so we're providing significant virtual guidance to our schools, not just on time, not just on learning, but on social emotional supports. We're helping our school divisions with how to transition between the phases. And we're also focused on, in 2 slides later, on student assessment. We have waived accreditation for the next school year so that schools can be focused on student mental health, student learning, but at this time, the federal government has not waived the actual assessment. So whereas accreditation is waived, there still is an expectation that schools will deliver the assessments. We're working closely with our out-of-time partners to make sure that our students have childcare and that they're supporting learning away from the school. So ultimately, what we need to do is prioritize relationships during this time. I have said several times, it's our job as education leaders to make sure that we're as excited about this school year as ever. And our students, besides their parents and their family members, we as educators are their most important resource. And so we need to continue to build that excitement. And so communication has got to be a huge piece of what we do. And so we're focused on continuing to communicate with our districts. We meet with our superintendents on a weekly basis to keep them up to date with what's going on at school. And we're focused on building an exciting school year for students, even if they're virtual. I'll wrap up just talking about the new equity compass that we've created, because I think this is really cool. And we have the 5 C's that I mentioned to you: critical thinking, creative thinking, communication, collaboration, citizenship. That's what we want our students to do from an instructional standpoint. We've also created at the Commonwealth level the 5 C's of equity. What is necessary for every student to have an equitable learning experience? Well, we would say culturally responsive instruction, courageous leadership to ensure that these difficult conversations are being had, curriculum reframing to make sure that that there's cultural competence in the approach to our standards. There's a compassionate student and family engagement approach to the way that we work with our kids, and there's continuous reflection, because none of us are perfect in our journey towards anti-racism. We have all got to be working on that together. So these 5 C's, in addition to the 5 C's for student outcomes, are what we're focused on. So I did that as fast as I could, but thank you from the Department of Education, and I appreciate the opportunity to share what's going on. And I know there will be questions later, but you have an expert in Dr. Pitre-Martin that I know Dr. Daire is going to introduce you to.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Dr. Lane. Just a quick message to our attendees in the virtual audience. If you all could start submitting any questions that you have, please, so that we'll be ready to ask your great questions to our esteemed panelist. Dr. Pitre-Martin, I'll turn it over to you.
So good afternoon to everyone, and I certainly want to thank VCU for giving me this opportunity to talk about something I love, and that is Petersburg City Public Schools. And a lot of what Dr. Lane has presented today, I will not go over again, because we relied heavily on the guidance documents from the Department of Education and making a lot of our decisions. So what I will share with you today is how we went through the process of doing our work, because that is critically important during a time of crisis and during a pandemic. I remember that one of my leadership mentors once told me, if you do not have a good understanding of how you're going to lead during the most challenging times, then you really are probably doomed to fail. So we started our journey on March 13th, which is when we knew that schools were going to close due to COVID-19, as a leadership team really coming to consensus on the 4 conditions upon which we were going to lead through this pandemic. The first was that we were going to acknowledge what was going on around us with this pandemic. We were going to measure each leg of the journey. So very much as you measure each leg of a flight, we were going to measure each leg of our journey through COVID-19. We were going to focus on what mattered for our community, because every community is very, very different. And then we were going to take action. So we have used those 4 guiding principles of working in a time of crisis to guide all of our work. And you will see elements of those 4 elements as I discuss some of the key decision points that we had to make as a school district. So the first one was acknowledging what is going on in our community in relationship to COVID-19. So Dr. Lane shared with you the guidance that they presented to us. We also had guidance from the CDC looking at whether we were in the low, moderate, or high risk category as a community. And so we use that information in partnership with the Department of Health, which is our Crater Health District here in Petersburg, to really inform our decision as to going hybrid, face-to-face, or totally virtual. I will tell you, as of today, we have had 552 cases of COVID-19 in Petersburg, and we have the highest number of COVID-19 cases of all 8 Crater Health District school districts. So, of course, that was going to be some important data for us as we decided to go 100% virtual in Petersburg City Public Schools. So that decision was made on July 22nd by our school board, and we quickly started work on the Petersburg Virtual Academy, which does open on September 8th of 2020, and we will take a close look at PVA, as we call it here, during the first 9 weeks of school to make decisions as we move into the second 9 weeks of school. So we had to acknowledge that we were certainly in a moderate category for the size of our community, and then we got to work on our virtual academy. We also knew that we had to measure each leg of this process. So what we have put together is a reopening plan that touches on 13 different areas of school and what school looks like. So I will share with you some of the critical pieces that we know we had to focus on specific to our community. The first one has to do with technology. We are in a community that certainly broadband internet access is accessible, but it's not affordable for our families. And so we have already handed out over 200 hotspots to ensure that our families have broadband internet access. And we have secured another 200 that we will be distributing during the week of September 1st. We also knew that our families needed devices, and we are a Chromebook district. So at this point, we have handed out over 2,000 of those, keeping in mind that we have a school district of about 4,000 students. So we have literally handed out Chromebooks to about half of our students, and we are prepared to hand out additional devices the week of September 1st as well. But we also knew that many of our families just don't use a lot of technology in the home. So we are establishing a good old-fashioned help desk here in Petersburg City Public Schools, where people can call up with a question regarding how to use their hotspot, how to use their Chromebooks, and how to access the tools that we have for our families. So knowing that we had to focus on technology was critically important. The second thing that is very important to our community would be the continuance of food distribution. So we have continued to provide breakfast and lunch for all of our families, and we will continue to go through that process effective September 8th. We will be doing meal distributions where we go into the community and we drop off meals in strategic locations across the city. They will have breakfast and lunch for 5 days of each week. So we're very excited because we know that matters for our families. The next thing that definitely matters for our families is social and emotional well-being. So as we begin our instruction on September 8th, in every school's schedule for the day, they will have a segment that is just for social and emotional learning. And we have an SEL curriculum that will be delivered, and it will be consistent across our school system. Our students have been out of school for 6 months. Many of them have been displaced. We have some of our family members who have lost jobs. Our children have gone through a lot, and we want to make sure that we're tending to their social and emotional needs as well as their academics. And then the next piece is ensuring that we're supporting our families throughout this process. So we have developed some additional communication tools for our families. Facebook and Twitter have become very important to us during this time. You can certainly access our Facebook and Twitter accounts on our website, and that link is in the chat box. But we are also starting our own YouTube channel here in Petersburg to be able to push out videos that are specific to parent trainings. And the parent portion of our YouTube channel will be called Parent Connect Ed. And this is an opportunity for parents to get informational items and tutorials on how to use the technology that they will have in their homes as well. We are also going to have the Wave, which is a family engagement bus that will be going into our communities. We will have technology on that bus as well, so that our families will be able to access the internet through that method as well. So we have a lot of things that we know we have put in place since COVID-19. We think that these are all good things long term. So though we have put those things in place since COVID-19, we just know that those things are just excellent, good practice. So we're excited. Right now, our enrollment is right at about 4,000. For this coming school year, we had our back to school event on Saturday where we had many of our families do a drive-through because we were practicing social distancing. And then we have 2 weeks of training with our staff ahead of us. And then our parents and families will pick up materials and supplies the week of September 1st. And the Petersburg Virtual Academy officially begins on September 8th. And we are absolutely thrilled to, even though it's virtually, be back with our students.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Pitre-Martin, and thank you, Dr. Lane, for your comments. As I'm scrolling through the questions, I think you've both really hit on a number of the questions, but I'm going to start with you, Dr. Pitre-Martin, and if I could just ask you and Dr. Lane, just because we only have about 15 minutes left, and so we do want to try to get to as many questions. So if possible, if you can, keep your responses to about 2 minutes, and that way we can hopefully get through a number of these questions. So Dr. Pitre-Martin, one question here we have is what are your thoughts about Richmond City's decision to use CARES Act funds to create childcare options for working families in lieu of providing education instruction opportunities?
Well, I will tell you that in light of Richmond, and I think we have some other school districts in the area also considering this is something that we have looked to. Every community has very different needs, and I said that earlier in the presentation. So for us, we really do have to focus our CARES funding, which was right at about $2.5 million, on technology and supports for our students and families. So certainly I can't speak to what those needs might be in Richmond, but it really has to do with what is specific for your community.
Fantastic, thank you. Dr. Lane, a question here is we know that COVID-19 can be transmitted by asymptomatic people. How are school divisions or VDOE able to measure low, moderate, and high transmission rates in school divisions with the concern that there's not a baseline for reopening with
Yeah,
respect.
and I think that I saw that question. Those transmission rates are community transmission rates, not school transmission rates.
Got it. Dr. Pitre-Martin, and you touched on the, I believe you called it the Petersburg Virtual Academy, and this may be a component of it, but what is the communication plan for parents of virtual learners, particularly since you identified that Petersburg has gone entirely virtual? And then Dr. Lane, if you could follow up, if there's any guidance that VDOE has provided school divisions regarding communication expectations for those divisions that are going virtual.
So I can get us started on that particular question. So one of the things that we have become very aware of is the need to do more mail outs to our homes. Good old-fashioned postal mail has become very huge for us in Petersburg City Public Schools. So for example, the 40-page reopening of school plan that covers the 13 different areas that will be addressed, that will be printed and put in the postal mail to go to every single home of our families. We know that about 2,500 of our addresses have one or more students living in that address. So we will be able to provide one document per home, even though there are multiple students. And so we did that during the Summer Academy as well. We sent out the workbook for Summer Academy to every single student. So even though they were not getting online for Summer Academy, they had the hard copy workbook. And I know one of the questions we have in the chat room is how did we get feedback? One of the pieces of feedback that we received during our survey process, we had a survey that was posted on our website for several weeks. And it included just stakeholders, parents, and then we had a separate staff survey that we ran as well. And we asked two critical questions. One, what are you most worried about if we go face-to-face or virtual? Because we gave them options. And in those results, we were able to see things like ensuring that we get communication if we don't have internet access currently. And so that's when postal mail became very important for us. And then the other thing that we were able to get good feedback on is just what I call the self-care concerns that they had. So things like food, things like making sure our school counselors are still going to be available to students who need that type of support. So I've also eased into the questions in the chat, but all of those things were put in place to ensure that we were prepared and communicating the way our families needed us.
Yeah, and from the state standpoint, I think what we've seen is, COVID-19 didn't create inequities, it highlighted inequities that already existed. And all of our school districts were really in a different place in terms of readiness for virtual learning. You had some school districts that were one-to-one for many years before this happened and had, virtual programs they had already built out. And frankly, you had some school divisions that had done none of that work. And so from the department standpoint, we're really trying to support our school divisions across those perspectives. And so we first thought about how can we make sure that our school divisions have what I consider the prerequisites to a good virtual learning program. And then once those prerequisites are met, how can we make sure that it's high quality? So I'll talk about both of those really quickly. The prerequisites in my mind are what we call a three-legged stool. To have a successful virtual program, every student has to have a device, whether it could even be a phone. It's not ideal. We'd rather it be a computer, but a device. The second leg of the stool is every student needs access to the internet, which again could be, fiber-based broadband running through the cable box in their home, or it could be as simple as a MiFi solution. But what you have to recognize is outside of our urban areas where there's usually access isn't the issue, it's affordability. You have major access issues when you get into the rural areas, and there's not even an available solution. And then third, you have to have essentially content and a learning management system to deliver instruction. So you're not going to have a successful virtual program without all three of those things working. So we've addressed all three of those things. We put out in our GEAR Act $18 million in grants that applications were due last Friday. So we have not actually awarded the money. We're awarding it this week, but $18 million went out are going out in the next couple of weeks to ensure that school divisions have the money they need to do devices and MiFis. The $210 million in CARES Act money already went out, so Petersburg was smart to go ahead and make those orders early, because you've probably heard about some of the trade issues going on with China and microchips. We're actually hearing that if you placed an order for computers today, it's going to be at least November before they'll arrive. So any school division that hasn't been proactive with that is probably in trouble from a virtual standpoint. And that's MiFis and computers. And I mentioned earlier that we have provided a learning management system for every school district. So from there, we've also invested from the state millions of dollars, and I won't go through every way that we've done it, to develop content that our teachers can use. And we've been doing weekly trainings through Virtual Virginia for teachers on how to deliver a virtual instruction. We've also put out significant guidance on how to care for students in this setting from a social, emotional, and mental health wellness standpoint, and all of that is in our Recover, Redesign, and Restart document. I can go into way more detail if other questioners have more specific questions, but this notion of how we're going to have a high quality experience is really important to us. The board is taking this on, and I think you're going to see in the coming weeks from the state not only the resources to try to do this, as I've mentioned through the grants, but also we're starting to develop standards for what parents should be able to expect. We've been working on it for some time. The board meets again in September. We're not just trying to set these standards for COVID, but how it can be a permanent fixture in guaranteeing a high quality virtual experience for students. Because whether or not there's a vaccine, I think we'll be in some of these hybrid and virtual settings with some families for some time.
Thank you both so much. I mean, these are definitely complex issues, and it sounds like that VDOE at the state level and also at the division level has really been thinking through a lot of these options, and these are quite complex. This next question, Dr. Lane, will continue with you, and it's somewhat of a three-part question. So what happens if a student or groups of students are tested and found to have COVID-19? So under what conditions should a school close because of positive or multiple positive COVID infections? And are there requirements in that area or mandates to divisions on how to handle that?
Yeah, so that is actually in our FAQ, and I can't share my screen, so I won't pull it up. But what I would say is that every situation is nuanced and different. The Virginia Department of Health has essentially recommended that the school divisions not say, you know, 1 case means this, 5 cases means this, 10 cases means this. They want you to look at each situation in context and work directly with the local health department to make that decision. There's a lot of factors that goes into that in terms of, you know, the contact tracing and you know, whether that student actually came into contact with other students, whether that student's family member actually came into contact with other families. And so what we have recommended is essentially a nuanced and case-by-case approach where every time there's a case, you contact the local health department, they put in place their protocols, and will make recommendations to school districts. If there's, you know, there could be a situation where the student's access to other people was very limited, and maybe it's just about quarantining that student. And there may be situations where the student's access to other students was actually extensive and may require a larger and school-based strategy.
Fantastic, thank you. Dr. Pitre-Martin, we obviously have talked a lot, and you've talked a lot about things that you're doing to help support social and emotional wellness for students. But what supports are you putting in place to also ensure the social, emotional, mental wellness for teachers who may be at risk for depression, anxiety, or other disorders that might be accelerated by learning virtually, and even just the underlying stress and fear around COVID-19?
So one of the things we established between the school closure and the end of the academic year was something called Wellness Wednesdays. And this was just for staff. And this was a time during the day where staff could check in with some of our support staff regarding just tensions or anxieties they might be having. What we learned through that process is that our staff really want those types of activities to continue during the school year. So we are currently putting together a schedule of different activities and events to support the self-care of our staff. That is so critically important as we go through this process, keeping in mind that, you know, many of our staff also have some pre-existing health concerns as well. So we want to be supportive in using the First Families Act and what that provides to also provide support to our staff as well.
Fantastic. And Dr. Lane, has any guidance been provided to school divisions with the area of teacher stress and well-being?
Yes, we have the 3R document, Recover, Redesign, and Restart, actually talks at length about how we should be caring for our teachers, well, not just teachers, it's really all staff members, mental health, and give strategies on how to deal with that. In the meantime, I was typing, I dropped in the chat a link to our FAQs. For the person that had questions on what to do if there's an exposure in the school, if you go to questions 12 through 42, we address that. But I think your specific question is addressed in questions 14, 16, and 23 as I'm looking at my screen. And so feel free to check out that link. And then that information on teachers is also included in this list of FAQs. And so with about 10 seconds more of scrolling, I could probably find the exact number, but I'll just encourage people to go there for the answer on how we're providing guidance in that area.
Great. And if I may just add one thing that I think Petersburg can consider, and even statewide, is to really look at how you can partner with your surrounding universities. I know Virginia State has a counselor education program. We have one in the School of Education, and also in our College of Humanities and Sciences. We have a clinical and counseling psychology programs. And we obviously have social work, which I believe Virginia State has, I'm not sure. So, you know, I think that's an area where I think this could be a good opportunity for school divisions to look to our local universities for partnerships. We've just got time for one question, and I'm actually going to ask one question that I had, and I'll probably throw this question to Dr. Lane, and then Dr. Pitre-Martin, you can definitely follow up. But we see on the news that many teachers are retiring or leaving the teaching profession rather than returning to school amidst COVID-19. So one question is, you know, at the state and local level, how do you anticipate this is going to impact the teacher shortage, and what can colleges and schools of education do to assist? Dr. Lane? Yeah,
thanks for the question. We've seen those reports on the media as well. We've asked our superintendents anecdotally about that thus far, and whereas there have been some, the number at least reported to us anecdotally is not overwhelming. We actually collect this data on October 30th, and so we won't actually know the impact of how many of these retirements have occurred until we do that. In a normal school year, we have on October 30th between 800 and 1,000 vacancies in a normal year. So regardless of what this number is, it's going to be higher than 800 or 1,000, which is already far too many. And so we have a significant teacher shortage issue that's going to be made much more drastic. But further, I think the teacher shortage issue will be huge. The broader staff shortage issues are even scarier, because when you start thinking about either the 3-foot or 6-foot distancing needed in a bus, you may only be able to get 12 on the 6-foot, maybe 26 on the 3-foot on a bus, which means you're going to need an incredible number of additional bus drivers and additional buses. So there's a whole money and resource issue there. But the other thing that's important is, because bus driving is a part-time job essentially in most school districts, and in many school districts it doesn't even pay benefits because it's part-time. Almost everyone that does that job is over the age of 60, 65. And so, these are people that fall into high-risk categories, which the department has recommended from the beginning. Anyone in a high-risk category, whether that's a student or a staff member or a teacher, should have remote and teleworking options only. And so the shortage issues are not just in the teaching area, it's across the board in schools, and it's going to be extremely impactful. So in terms of how universities can help us, well, number one, get a lot more students to choose an education major. And I don't know, I think that's the silver bullet Dr. Daire probably thinks about every day. But I think I saw a statistic that we had 600 math openings a couple years ago and had 60 graduates in math statewide with math education as their major. So we have got to get people thinking about that. I think it's got to be double majoring and multiple strategies to get people excited about it. I think the work that we did to recreate the undergraduate teaching programs, and Andrew, I'll let you maybe go into more detail with that if you want to, but we basically had closed down our undergraduate teaching programs and required master's degrees. We reversed course on that about 3 years ago. And we opened, since that legislation was passed, about 59 new undergraduate teaching programs. I think that's going to have a huge impact. I think students choosing teaching from the beginning is going to be big. But I don't think undergraduates is going to be the only solution. We're going to have to create more career switching programs. We're going to have to fund more of these residency type programs. We're going to have to encourage people that want to have a purposeful life and maybe jump out of some of these more corporate jobs that they're not finding purpose in, if that's true of themselves, to choose teaching as a second avenue. And we're going to have to create some flexible policies, whether it's with retirees or others, to find ways to access our school communities. At the same time, I want to be wary that we don't make it so easy to become a teacher that there are no standards and we're not ensuring high quality once they come into the classroom. So it's a delicate line, but this was an issue before COVID, and it's going to be only worse because of it.
Thanks so much, Dr. Lane. Dr. Pitre-Martin, unfortunately, we are pretty much out of time, but one of the things I did not mention in my opening remarks was that you are going to be keynoting the School of Education's convocation. And so I will try to get that information out quickly so folks can sign up and they can hear more from you. And thanks, Dr. Lane. I will turn it back over to James now.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lane, Dr. Pitre-Martin, Dr. Daire, and Dr. Gooden for this incredible presentation and conversation. As a father of a 6- and 8-year-old, I'm very vested as well. I'm very curious about what is happening. Also, a wonderful thank you to each of our participants for today's session. Wonderful questions, incredible engagement. We really, truly appreciate it, and your time as well. We hope you will complete the survey about today's session that we're going to send out afterwards. One of the items in that also is that survey is suggestions for future topics that the Wilder School Alumni Lunch and Learns that we could consider. That would be wonderful for you to continue, so we can continue to inform and connect and let everyone know what is happening. The recording of the session will be made available on the Wilder School YouTube site. You can check that out, and that link will be shared over in the comments section, but we will also share this recording with all of our speakers and also all of our participants in a follow-up email. We hope to see you at our next session on Wednesday, September the 16th. That's Wednesday, September the 16th at noon. It will feature Dr. Stephen Moret, the President and CEO of Virginia Economic Development Partnership, and he will share the economic development impact of current challenges on the Commonwealth of Virginia, including local business communities, unemployment rates, and economic stability throughout the region. And at this time, I'd like to turn the session over to Dr. Gooden with a special event announcement. Dr. Gooden?
Thank you so much. And as I mentioned at the beginning of the session, and first of all, thanks to all the panelists for another great session, please mark your calendars for a very special event on Thursday, September the 17th, where we will be honoring and celebrating the 30th anniversary of Governor Wilder's inauguration. It will be a full-day virtual symposium from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. We're hosting this in collaboration with Virginia Union University. And some of the events include reflecting on Governor Wilder's administration, legal decisions, administrative decisions. We will also have a student panel looking at civic engagement, and we will have a panel moderated by Dr. Larry Sabato looking at election 2020. So this promises to be a celebratory and educational and intellectually stimulating event on Thursday, September 17th, 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. We hope to see you all there. Thank you so much.